Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sacerdotus Hangouts. Today, I'm going to talk on the burden of proof. If you have ever heard about God or talked to God about God to an atheist, most likely they responded to you, "Where's the proof?" And they will say, "The burden of proof is on you." Whenever you try to argue with them that their position is wrong, these words are often thrown at theists, so to speak, in an attempt to force them to prove that God does exist. Atheists often say, "You claim God exists, so the burden of proof rests on the one making the claim. So show me the proof." Now, the intention of this is not to ingest knowledge and truth regarding God's existence. It is an attempt to trap the theist by setting up an endless debunking session of any evidence provided in regards to God's existence, or the fallacy of a priorism, which is when you present different facts or evidence to someone and they will deny it, they will dismiss it, they don't want to hear it. You show them exhibit A, exhibit B, exhibit C, and despite your opponent wanting to know something or discuss it with you, when you present these exhibit A, B, C's, or whatever it is, the evidence, and they dismiss it, they don't want to hear it, or they say it's not valid evidence. This is the fallacy of a priorism. And atheists are very fond of falling into that fallacy. Everything is right except for what the theist offers. So if a atheist philosopher offers reasons for atheism, then the atheist will say, yeah, it's okay, it's fine, it's valid, it's rational. If a theist philosopher offers arguments for God, the atheist will say, no, it's not valid, it's fallacious, it's irrational. Now, this is called the fallacy of a priorism, when they are cherry picking what they want to accept and not accept. So they get into these discussions with theists, ask them for their evidence regarding God, when in reality they just want to just troll and start bringing up all these different irrelevant things. And then when you try to answer them, they dismiss each one of them. So they're really not trying to hear you out or listen to you, which is unfortunate because it makes atheism looks ridiculous or unprepared. Because if you're so afraid to acknowledge somebody else's evidence, somebody else's facts, somebody else's arguments, if you're so afraid to engage them, to even look at them, that says a lot about your own argument, your own evidence, your own position. Imagine in a court of law, you have the defendant and the prosecutor. And one side presents the evidence for the case defending their client. Now imagine that the other side said, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see the evidence. You can't have a trial. You can't have a court case that way. You have to listen to what's presented. And then the people as a collective, the jurors, make the decision, innocent or guilty. So atheists make a big mistake when discussing with a theist, rejecting or dismissing any evidence or arguments presented to the atheist. That's a big mistake to make. And when the atheist is discussing with a theist and they insist that the burden of proof rests on the theist, then they're pretty much not wanting, they don't want to get into a discussion with you. In other words, The atheists do this in order to step outside of the debate and become a sort of outsider, questioning the theist. So it's almost as if the atheist, instead of becoming the opponent of the theist, starts going into the moderator position, which the moderator usually asks the different participants of a debate to clarify a certain point. And you can't do that when you're having a discussion. If you're having a debate or a discussion with someone, you either for one thing or another thing. For whatever it is that you're supporting, you have to defend that because that's what you believe, that's what you support, that's what you trust as valid. You can't turn yourself into a moderator and start asking the other side to elaborate and whatnot, while at the same time not presenting your own arguments and case. By doing this, the atheist does not have any obligation to defend atheism and prove God does not exist. Because again, he or she is stepping outside of the discussion, outside of the debate. Now, in a psychological sense, this is a safety mechanism. Displacement. It's not me, I'm going to push it somewhere else. It's not my burden, I'm going to push it somewhere else. And this is used by them to protect them from trying to do the impossible, which is disprove the existence of God. And the reason why I say it's impossible is because, one, where would you start? If God is not material, if he exists outside of space and time, then what kind of test can you develop to show that this being, this entity does not exist? Second, you will have to know everything there is to know about this universe, about this realm, this existence, about every other dimension that exists parallel to our own, any multiverses that might be out there. You will have to know about all of those things in order to know for a fact that there is no God. So the atheist case is really difficult to prove. It doesn't hold up because you have no evidence. You can't work with it. So the question is, who has the burden? Again, atheists like to claim that theists or people that believe in God automatically have the burden. You believe in God, so you're the one that has to prove it to me. Yet, their claim that God does not exist, or even an elaboration of why they believe that God does not exist, their supposed lack of belief in God, they have to present it. They have to work with that. Otherwise, the debate becomes one-sided. It becomes like an interview. So the burden of proof, well, this depends on the situation. But first, let me give you a bit of history as to why atheists use this sophistry during discussions and debates regarding God's existence. In the mid-20th century, Anthony Flew, a prominent philosopher who was an atheist and later became a theist, presented the idea of atheism being the default position. This is where the whole idea of we're born atheists. Babies are born atheists. They have nothing to do with religion or God. They get indoctrinated, brainwashed with the idea, the concept of God and religion. So this idea of the default being atheism comes from the philosopher Anthony Flew, who became a theist later on. This is also labeled the presumption of atheism, which is a fallacy. What this means is that we all should be atheists until evidence for God is presented. Now, despite being fallacious, Many atheists adopt this trend of thought. There is no evidence that atheism is the default position, nothing at all. Even atheist psychologists and scientists of different fields agree with this, that there's nothing to support atheism as being the default position. We are hardwired for religion. We are hardwired to believe in God, in the supernatural. We are not hardwired to reject belief in God, to reject belief in the supernatural, or to reject religious beliefs. We are not hardwired to lack belief in any of them. No matter how many ways you want to define atheism, we are not hardwired for that. We are hardwired to be religious, to process religious thoughts and ideas, to have belief in God and the supernatural, that there's something beyond us, beyond the physical, beyond the material. With the discovery of the VMAT2 gene, or most colloquially called the God gene, Flu's argument goes out the window. If atheism is the default position, or we must presume atheism, then why do all of us have a gene that predisposes us to believe in God and the supernatural? Now think about that for a moment. If we subscribe to the theory of evolution, evolution explains to us how life evolved on this planet. And life evolved based on certain characteristics that organisms possess, which allow them to survive or not survive. So, for example, an animal that cannot swim well will not be able to survive if the area that the animal exists in floods or is constantly flooding. It's not going to survive unless it adapts itself to that environment. And what environment is this? An ecosystem, nature. Where is nature on Earth? So when you put that into perspective, we have the VMAT2 gene, the God gene, that predisposes us to belief, to faith, to God, to the supernatural. Now, this gene obviously is part of evolution. It developed there somewhere during the course of evolution. Now, if evolution teaches us that organisms work around their environment or with the environment, and those that don't make the effort or are not able to become extinct, then what purpose does a gene that allows us to focus on the supernatural, God, and religion do for any organism? It doesn't make absolutely any sense for us to have a gene that allows us to think about God, the supernatural, and have religious beliefs. If nature, material, physicalism is all there is, if God doesn't exist, if the supernatural doesn't exist, if religious beliefs are just myths or stories that we create, then why do we have this gene? How can a being that doesn't exist, that's not part of nature, how can a natural state that's not even existing above nature, or beliefs help an organism survive? Does a snake start praying to God somewhere? Or a monkey? Or Australopithecus? Do they start praying when there's a flood coming or a storm? What purpose does this gene have? And that's the topic for another show. Moreover, if atheism is the default position, then how did belief develop from a default position? From a default non-belief mental state? Where did it come from? If atheism is the default, then how did religion develop? We don't get answers for that. And unfortunately, atheists don't like to give answers. They want theists to do all the talking, and they don't want to contribute to the discussion. And that's sad. It really is sad. In order to disbelieve something, one must first be aware of that something. I can't tell you I do not believe you unless I know what is you told me. The topic, the concept that you told me that I'm responding to saying that I do not believe you. Where have you seen in this world somebody walk up to a stranger and say, I don't believe you? It doesn't happen, because in order for you to say that, you have to know first what it is that you don't believe. You have to be aware of that. So disbelief, atheism, lack of belief, rejection of God, the supernatural religion, cannot be the default position. It's impossible. The mind cannot make any conclusions on anything without prior knowledge on whatever it is that it will be making a conclusion on. That is just how the brain operates, how the mind, the neuroscience behind it. We cannot think about something, we cannot conclude on something, we cannot opine on something unless we know what that something is. If I give my opinion on something in politics, it's because I know what it is. A social issue. I give my opinion on abortion, or same-sex marriage, or trickle-down economics. I'm able to give an opinion on it, or an argument for it or against it, because I know of it. So how can an atheist lack belief in something, someone, somewhere, without having prior knowledge of that? It's cognitively impossible. Yet some atheists like to push this argument, despite how absurd and bizarre it is. In reality, atheists use this fallacious argument to stall during a debate. It gives them time to think, to back up a little bit, to analyze. By stating that atheism is the default position, atheists are attempting to force believers to go on the defensive. For example, if 99 of the people in a town are Democrats, and the one person who makes up the 1% is Republican, then it is obvious that the default position is the Democratic one. This puts the Republican on the defensive because he or she is outnumbered. Similarly, if atheists claim that atheism is the default position via nature or by nature, then believers must defend why they are adopting a radical one. This is a setup for what's called the shifting of the burden. Now back to the burden of proof. The burden of proof falls on either party, depending on the situation. Here's a scenario. If an atheist approaches a theist, saying that he or she lost faith or cannot believe in God because of whatever reason, then the atheist puts the theist on the defensive. The theist then can either ignore the atheist or respond by attempting to restore this faith in God or answering whatever reason for the loss of belief. However, if the atheist approaches a theist claiming there is no God, God is a myth, a superstition, then the atheist is making a claim, and the theist has a right to request proof of this claim. The atheist must then provide evidence for this confident claim that there is no God. The burden of proof always rests with the prosecution, who needs to support the case with evidence. Let's say there are two individuals, a believer, B, and a non-believer, NB. If B wants to convince NB that God exists, then the burden rests on B. If NB wants to convince B that God does not exist, then the burden rests on NB. If B and NB are trying to convince each other, then the burden rests on both of them. If both B and NB are just discussing God and have no intention to convince either that his or her position is wrong, then neither have the burden because they are just exchanging ideas. So, in reality, in a serious dialogue or debate, in anything, not just religion, the burden of proof rests on both because it takes two people to have this discussion. And if there's a discussion, there's usually two sides. The atheist and theist should be able to provide evidence for his or her claim. This makes the discussion more fruitful, doesn't it? By having one side provide proof as the other listens, then this is not a debate, but an interview. You're sitting down with Oprah or Dr. Phil, getting interviewed. Atheists can say all they want, that their position is not a claim. This is intellectually dishonest. Because again, I can ask you, why do you not believe in God? Just because you, quote unquote, lack a belief in God doesn't mean that nobody can inquire about that lack of belief. And if somebody does inquire, you should be able to respond to that inquiry. And if you're so strongly involved in your lack of belief in God, then your argument should be equally as strong. The presumption that there is no God, God is a myth, or superstition is a claim. If you say there is a God, there is no God, that is a claim. If you say God is not a myth or is a myth, that is a claim. If you say God or religious beliefs are superstition or not superstition, that is a claim. It has to be backed up with proof, with evidence. Now, ironically, the atheist channel on the site about.com has this to say about the burden of proof. Quote, the first thing to keep in mind is that the phrase burden of proof is a bit more extreme than what is often needed in reality. Using that phrase makes it sound like a person has to definitely prove, beyond a doubt, that something is true. That, however, is only rarely the case. A more accurate label would be a burden of support. The key is that a person must support what they are saying. This can involve empirical evidence, logical arguments, and even positive proof. Which of those must be presented will depend very much upon the nature of the claim in question. Some claims are easier and simpler to support than others, but Regardless, a claim without any support is not one which merits rational belief. Thus, anyone making a claim which they consider rational and which they expect others to accept must provide some support. End quote. So there you have it. Any claim that someone may consider rational must provide some support. Atheists are not exempt from this. And notice the quote says, if the person is making a claim that they believe is rational and they expect others to accept, they have to provide some support. They have to prove their case. So if American atheists, Richard Dawkins, Lawrence Krauss, all these different Twitter atheists, Facebook atheists, Google Plus atheists, atheist professors, atheist bloggers out there, if they want to push atheism on society as a rational position, a rational belief, something that everyone should adopt, if they believe that we all should leave behind, quote unquote, the myths, religious beliefs, which they classify as myths or superstition, they have to explain why. Not only why they want society to abandon these things, but why their position makes better sense, is more rational. If you don't do that, no one is going to listen to you. And I think this is one of the major reasons why atheism doesn't really work. It doesn't last long. People go through different phases in life. They believe in God, they stop believing, then they come and start believing again. Sometimes they stop believing again. Atheism seems to take over countries and then it disappears, and all of a sudden religion takes over again. So atheism doesn't seem to last long in people. And I believe the reason this is because, or one of the reasons why, they don't offer any proof, any support of their claims. They go around buying billboards. You know, Christmas is a myth, but they don't explain why. They don't offer proof of that. They expect somebody to see the sign up there somewhere, the ad, and say, okay, yeah, that's true. I'm going to start believing that Christmas is a myth. Or saying that the Bible is fabricated or borrowed stories from another culture or is mythology. They expect people to just believe that just because they said it. Or if an atheist comes out of nowhere and says, God is a myth. There's no such thing as a sky daddy. There's no such thing as a sky fairy. God is in your imagination. It's in your mind. There's no such thing as a man up there somewhere sitting on a throne with a white beard. The question that will follow is, how do you know? Where's your proof? That's what usually a normal person will respond with. How do you know? So atheists are not exempt from this burden of proof. They have to support their ideas, their claims. Otherwise, they're just making a fool of themselves. Atheists who play this shift the burden of proof game, where they expect the deists to do all the talking, while they put themselves in a position where atheism doesn't have to be questioned or challenged or proven, they only make themselves look intellectually weak, and they make atheism look intellectually weak and unsupported. They attempt to distort logic in order to mask their lack of intellectual confidence, because that's all it is, a lack of intellectual confidence. You're not confident enough to defend your atheist beliefs. you're not confident enough to support the claims that you make in the name of atheism. So then what happens to atheism? It gets thrown away. It's nonsense. Nobody will buy into it. So this is why I stress a lot with atheists that they have to defend their ideas, their beliefs, even their so-called quote unquote lack of belief. Because if they don't, then no one is going to take them seriously at all. So I advise any atheists out there listening or who will listen to this later on to provide arguments. I would love to hear them. I'm sure many other people would love to hear them too. And you could try to use anything to try to formulate an argument against God, the existence of God, and whatnot. And that's perfectly fine as long as it fits the boundaries of logic and is accurate. But don't go around saying this Christian blew up this abortion clinic or this Muslim shot up Charlie Hebdo. Therefore, Christianity and Islam is irrational evil. That's a false analogy fallacy. It defeats your intention to present atheism as a rational position. And this is why atheism doesn't last long. And there are studies of this, and the Pew study which shows that atheism doesn't last long in people. People get caught up in the whole atheism movement here and there, and then they change. And every year, the Catholic Church has thousands of atheists who become Catholic. Leia Libresco is one of them, who's very outspoken atheist. Was part of the recent rally back in 2012. Very critical of God and religion in her blogs and also her podcast. Then a year later, she got baptized into the Catholic Church. So why was this? Well, she offers many reasons, but the underlying reason is because atheism is not strong. It has no platform. If atheists are going to rely on the fallacy of aphorism, appeal to ignorance, appealing to the idea that nature could create things on itself, and therefore there's no God, or a false cause fallacy, then it's not going to work. Anybody who's intelligent, who's a critical thinker, is not going to adopt atheism as valid or the norm because it doesn't advertise itself well. And this is why I believe atheists like to use provocation to promote atheism, because that's what sells. If you ever watch the wrestling, these different wrestling organizations out there, if they just have two guys or two women slamming each other back and forth, that really is not going to get a lot of people's attention because you could see that on the street. I mean, you could probably see that in a husband and wife who were caught cheating. They probably beat each other to death. Or in high school, teenagers beating the heck out of each other. So it's not something that we never see or we have to pay to see in regards to people body slamming each other. But if you add a storyline and you start creating all these different characters that are provocative, these characters that they go against social norms, such as hitting a woman. You see a wrestler slap another female wrestler. You see a wrestler beat up an old man or a disabled person. These are things that go against the social norms. Then, like, for some reason, we find that attractive. That gets our attention. We like to see that stuff for some reason. When we see these provocative things in the media or anywhere, something that gathers attention. Now, think about it. If I was to go right now on the street and start preaching or speaking about a saint or somebody, most likely some few people will stop by and look to see what the heck I'm doing, why I'm making so much noise, and walk away because people are busy. And many times religious messages are not popular on the street. But if I take that same message and start using curse words and vulgarity, rest assured a crowd is going to form. A big crowd is going to form around me to see what is it that I'm doing. I'm talking about God, about the gospel, about a saint, or a teaching of the church. But I'm doing it with curse words, vulgarity, and things that are not expected of someone in the Catholic Church. A crowd will form around it. Because for some reason, people like that. People like these displays that are out of the ordinary. So this is why atheism tends to be popular with people, especially with young people, because it's very rebellious. It captures your attention. Over 90% believe in God, and then you have this one person. God is a myth. That's superstition. All the attention is going to go to that one person because he or she is the one that stands out from the norm where 90% believe in God. Now, I will talk about this later on in another program regarding the psychology of atheists and why atheists behave certain ways and why they tend to adopt the troll behavior, especially online. I will get into that on a different show. It should be interesting. I'm still doing research on that, looking at different journals, different studies, and also conducting my own studies on my own encounters with online atheists and running tests on those studies in order to determine the different correlations and whatnot as to why atheists, particularly those online, love to resort to troll type behaviors or behaviors that seem to be genuinely engaging you, but then insults you out of nowhere, or is dismissive for whatever you present, or just seeks to annoy or harass you, and then pretend that you're the one that's the problem. I will get into that in a different Hangout show, and also on Sacerdotus Radio and on my blogs. I'll get into that into more detail and explain why, from a psychological standpoint, why that is. But I touched a bit on it now in regards to atheists need to be provocative in order to get attention. Because as an atheist psychologist said, which I forget his name right now. Atheism is a hard sell. It's a very hard sell. It's not easy to sell. You cannot go in a church or a Muslim nation or Hindu nation or even a tribe somewhere out there that believes in a specific god or gods and tell them be atheists without walking out of there getting assaulted or beaten up. Because atheism is a hard sell, whereas religion sells better. Because people pray, something happens. And this affects how the people interact with the religion. They pray, something happens, most likely they're going to repeat the prayer. And this is typical psychology, Pavlov. You condition people. They get a positive stimulus, you get a positive response. And eventually you get conditioned to that. Religion tends to offer a familial sense. People feel like at home. Human beings are social animals. We like being with other people, with other human beings. And the church offers that. So people like that. It's a better sell. It attracts. Sometimes churches are very flexible with the music they use in their services or how they preach. Depending on what your tastes are, you get attracted to that. What does atheism offer? Nothing. They don't have any services. They don't have any churches, even though some of them out there create these crazy atheist temples, but I don't really consider them serious atheists. Nevertheless, the bottom line is that atheism is really hard to defend, to sell to the people. Now, why people become atheists? There's many different reasons, which I don't have time to go into now. And they get down to the individual pretty much. There's no generic answer to that. I can't say people become atheists because they hate God or because they prayed and God didn't answer them, because that's not the case for everyone. Each individual atheist is different. But when it comes to religion, religion is easier to sell to the people. Not only via the religion itself, the dogmas, the doctrines, and whatnot, but how the religion presents itself to the world. If you go somewhere to a country that never heard of Catholicism, and again, I'm speaking hypothetically because Catholicism is all over the world. But let's say there's a place out there in the world where Catholicism never reached. And the priest or a nun or a lay missionary goes and starts teaching the people about Jesus and whatnot. And he or she sees that the people are poor, they need food, they're starving, they need medical attention and whatnot. So the missionary provides this. They show them how to plant better crops, how to maintain those crops, shows them how to clean water, how to care for wounds, maybe even get them some medication, antibiotics or something. And then you have an atheist who comes somewhere and visits the tribe. And the atheist starts saying that the people should leave behind their superstition and starts teaching them about science, the theory of evolution, the Big Bang Theory, cosmic inflation, and whatnot. And focuses on that they have to be rational or educated. Who do you think the tribe will respond better to? If you say the religious person, the missionary, then you're correct. Why? because the religious person is doing something that's attractive, something that the people can relate to, and they see that this person is genuinely interested in helping them, giving them food, showing them how to take care of crops and whatnot, how to clean water, how to tend to their wounds, whatnot, and maybe even teach them some basic education, arithmetic, and whatnot. Clearly, the intention is to help the people in all of their needs, while at the same time teaching them about Jesus Christ. But the atheist just comes and tells them that they have to leave behind their superstitions and be rational and be scientific minded. Depending on the tribe, the atheist might get killed. He or she might get sacrificed to one of their gods because of the approach that the atheist offers, as opposed to the missionary, priest, nun, or lay, or even the Protestant, because it is all about the approach and how they defend what they're representing. And this is one of the ways where atheism fails. Their approach can be too strong, and then since it's too strong, there's nothing behind it supporting it, so it collapses. When you can't supply a reason why not to believe in God other than your opinion that it's a myth or superstition, that's nothing. That's nonsense. That's hogwash. In order for you to make atheism more successful, more attractive, you have to supply reasons. Otherwise, people won't pay attention to you. They won't pay any mind to you. And this is why atheists have to be provocative in order to get people's attention. If they're not provocative, if they don't put out those ads or have those recent rallies that only happen once in a lifetime, if they don't have these things or go on CNN or these different networks and speak in an offensive, direct way, they're not going to get any attention. So this is why the atheist typically avoids the burden of proof and likes to pin it on the theist, because he or she knows that you cannot defend atheism rationally, logically. You cannot, whether as the default position, as a rejection of different beliefs or God, or as a lack of belief in God and religious beliefs. There's no way you can defend atheism. Now, some of them try to use science. Some of them try to use philosophy. Some of them try to use the faults of religion, or religious people, I should say, to present the case for atheism. But these fail. Science is not meant to prove or disprove God. Science is meant to study the observable natural world or plane. Biology, psychology, physics, astronomy, astrophysics, anthropology, chemistry, geology, all these different ologies out there. Their purpose is to study nature in an objective manner, to find out the details of how the natural world works, depending on their area of study, whether it's physics, whether it's biology, psychology, or whatever it is, whatever field you belong in, that you're studying in, that you earn your degrees in. Obviously, your doctorate, your PhD degree. You focus on that. But in a natural setting, you study nature. So I find it funny when atheists like to cite scientific theories and facts in order to defend atheism. All you're doing is defending the scientific fact or theory. You're not touching the argument that God is a myth or does not exist. You do not. All you are doing is inferring on the scientific theories, facts, hypotheses, your ideas, your beliefs. By themselves, these theories, facts, hypotheses do not support atheism. So you can't say, oh, this rock is formed this way. So that means it's not well designed. So that means that there's no designer. So that means there is no God. That's ridiculous. That's special pleading. You offering your own special case of investigation, your own special inquiry into that rock in order to support your argument. The same thing with evolution. Organisms evolve throughout time. They mutated. They evolved into newer species via speciation. Organisms went through micro and macro evolution. You can't go and say, okay, since life progressed that way, God had nothing to do with it. That's a faulty argument. Because how do you know that? How do you know that? How can you answer that question? An atheist can't. You assume that just because evolution is a process, that the process happened by itself. You're making a special pleading case. Same thing with cosmic inflation. Everything, all of matter, was all compressed. And for whatever reason, it expanded. And it continues to expand even till today. It started out hot, started getting cooler and cooler and cooler, allowing the hydrogen and helium to form stars. And the remaining residue out there collected, iron, and all the other elements collected, forming rocks, gas. They collected and formed planets. Now, if you say, okay, well, that happened, God had nothing to do with it, God doesn't exist. How can you know that? And then what's funny is that a lot of atheists say, we don't know how the universe really began or what triggered the cosmic expansion or the Big Bang. We don't know, but we know it's not God. If you know it's not God, then you definitely know what caused it. Because if it wasn't God, then you know what it was. So do you see how atheism many times falls on its own face, so to speak? To anthropomorphized atheism. It doesn't offer solid arguments. Sometimes atheists like to rest on the back of science. Believing science is atheistic. It's not. Science doesn't care. Science just wants to know about nature. It wants to look at nature in an objective way without relying on sacred texts or atheist opinions. It wants to look at it as it is. Not via any filter or any inferences or whatnot. That's what science is. It's not atheistic. It's not theistic. The same thing with philosophy. Some atheists like to create all kinds of arguments against God. And philosophy is all about wisdom, finding the truth behind the truth, going to the nitty gritty of ideas, thoughts, facts, perception. These, though, support atheism, these ideas. So it's very difficult to even use philosophy to defend atheism. For example, the contingency of the universe. We know that the universe exists, but we also know the universe doesn't exist on its own merits, so to speak. Something keeps the universe in existence. It doesn't exist because it is the universe. Just like we don't exist on our own merits or on our own accord. We could die, we could exercise, we could do all the right things and still die. We don't have control of that. We don't have control of our material, of our atoms, molecules, cells, organs. We don't have control in a sense that we could dictate when they create and when they destroy themselves. And we definitely can't come back to life just by thinking about it or saying a word because of the contingent nature of this universe and everything it contains, including us. So, logically speaking, something out there is maintaining all of this. Now, it's okay to say you don't know. That's perfectly fine. But you cannot disqualify God either. You could say you don't know because, of course, who can know all of that? Who could go back through time and see cosmic inflation as it happened, the first moment of it? Who can do that? No one can because time began at the point of expansion. So it's not like we can invent a time machine and go back to time and view this because time will disappear somewhere down the line, which will make the person doing the time traveling disappear. Because in order for the person to exist, they have to exist in space, in a matter state, and in time, a temporal state. If you take one of those states out, the matter dissipates, it disappears. You cease to exist because you violated the rules of physics, the laws of physics, I should say. So, atheists, in order to make atheism more attractive, they really need to step up the game and offer arguments. Going around on Twitter, Google Plus, or Facebook, or MySpace, or whatever network there is out there nowadays, or blogs, or even podcasts, Google Hangouts, and saying that we all should be atheists and there's no God and God is a myth. If you don't support those with something solid, people are not going to pay attention to you. They're just going to call you a hater or a hating atheist or a bigot or something. At least a person who's serious about inquiry and finding out the truth and the facts about things. If someone's naive and just believes something because it was presented to them in an attractive fashion, then of course they're going to start believing that thing. But if you're a person who's a thinker, who wants you to show the steak and they don't just want to hear the sizzling, then of course they're not going to accept atheism and the like because atheism doesn't really offer anything solid. And if you go around on these different forums online or elsewhere, dismissing arguments, calling people morons or stupid just because they happen to believe in God, you're not doing anything for atheism. You're just reminding the theists that atheism doesn't have a backbone. It doesn't have nothing to stand upon, something to remain upright with. That's what you're doing. You're not offending anybody. You're not disproving God or religion or anything by those actions. All you're doing is disproving atheism. It's weak. A theist can offer you all kinds of arguments. We see Cameron and the other guy, I forget his name, with the banana. I mean, they create all kinds of arguments trying to defend God and posit the idea that God exists. They're very creative, even though it's a crazy argument, the whole banana thing. But at least they have something to offer. It may be ludicrous, but at least they offer you something to make you think, to rethink, even though it's a bit silly. But the atheist does not. The atheist just makes claims, does not support them, dismisses your claims and your evidence, and then claims that atheism refutes everything, where it really is just a bunch of hot air. Doesn't produce anything at all to defend itself, to substantiate itself. So the burden of proof, it rests on both, and especially during the situation of a debate or a discussion. If you come to me saying that God is a myth, God does not exist, I'm going to ask you, how do you know? And you better give me an answer. If you come to me and tell me, well, I don't, I'm going to ask you why. So you better give me an answer. Otherwise, I'll think you're just pulling my leg or trying to get a response from me. So hopefully this Hangouts, this show right now, will get atheists to think about this, that they really have to work hard to defend atheism. That whole thing of pinning the burden on theists all the time, it's not going to work. It's not going to work at all. And it's counterproductive because it just shows that you're not ready, or you're not prepared, or you're not intellectually confident to defend atheism. Anyhow, thank you for listening. God bless and Mary keep. And for all of those out there in the Northeast, New England area, please be safe. There's a huge blizzard coming. The meteorologists keep saying that it's going to be probably one of the biggest or the biggest ever in the region. 30 plus inches of snow is coming at 4 to 6 inches of snow an hour, plus gusting winds and all that. So please stay off the roads. Just keep the kids home. I mean, even if they keep the schools open, just keep them home. That's what I would do if I had kids. I would just keep them home. And it's not worth going out there and risking your life, even for school. Even though I'm a nerd myself and I love learning. Whenever there's a storm or something, I stayed home. I mean, that's why we have email. You could email your teacher and probably learn something through email. And nowadays they have Skype and Google Hangouts and all these things that you could use to communicate with your teacher's professor. So it's not worth going out there and risking your life for that. If for whatever reason you have to go out, be safe. Try to use the mass transportation system if it's operating. And stock up on things, water, especially water, and batteries for flashlights and things like that, and food, canned food, things that you don't have to cook just in case the electricity goes out or the gas goes out or something goes out. But please be safe out there. Bye now.